Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Carter, and I'm the founder and CEO of Global Minded. We are all about creating a capable, diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, any way that you can define diversity into the education, economic mobility, and leadership pipeline. And we do that in a number of different ways, one of which is an annual conference. This year, for the second year, it's virtual. And now we're coming out of COVID, thank goodness, and we'll be live next June 22nd, 23rd, and 24th in Denver. But this year, our theme is Reboot Resilience and Rebound Remarkable. This whole week has been dedicated to health and mental health and wellness. And I want to thank our panel leader today, Elaine Duncan, because she's really been the mastermind behind most of the programming and the people who were featured this week. So if you weren't able to join some of the other sessions, they're all featured in our newsletter article. They're all posted to YouTube. This session is being recorded, and it will also be featured in tomorrow's newsletter and posted onto the YouTube channel, so you can share it liberally with the networks that you work with. So I am delighted to introduce Elaine Duncan. She is one of remarkable leaders in this space. And the session today is Trauma-Informed Teaching, Coaching, and Managing Healing to Holistic Wholeness and Health. And Elaine will share a little bit, I hope, of her personal story with you, but she is really in a unique position to bring these leaders together today to really help demystify and make transparent the work that we can all do to embrace and be real about our humanness and our challenges and the ways in which we can all heal. So with that, Elaine, welcome, and welcome to your amazing panel.
Thank you, Carol, and thank you for trusting me with this week, because I think this work is so incredibly important. And when we started planning this, it was a different time. So many things have happened over the past few months. There's a new book out by Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey called What Happened to You, that I think should be required reading for every human on the planet. Dr. Gabor Mate's new movie, The Wisdom of Trauma, is fantastic. And it feels like it's becoming a lot more okay for people to talk about this. And I wanted to just start out with Dr. Mate has so many different definitions with different contexts, but one that really hit me in my soul was that trauma is an overwhelming threat that we don't know how to deal with. It's not what happened to you, it's the things that happen inside of you as a result of what happened. It's a disconnection from self. When we lose the ability to be ourselves, we don't listen to our gut feelings. And when you're not listening to your gut feelings, you could potentially put yourself in dangerous situations, which I certainly have done. I'm so incredibly grateful for everyone who is going to be on the panel today, because each and every one of them has helped me, and sometimes in ways they didn't even know. So I want to really jump right in, and I'll interject some thoughts throughout the way. But Phoenix, you're going to start us off. And Phoenix and I met only a few months ago, and it was kind of a serendipitous connection. And I think she is truly beautiful and wonderful, and she's doing amazing work in the world. She's a social worker who's been dedicated to supporting childhood trauma survivors for over a decade. She received her master's of social work from NYU in 2011, and she served with nonprofits and education. She also had a private practice. And she's worked in the criminal justice system. She's a member of the BIPOC community and the LGBTQIA community. And she's also trained in racial diversity, equality, and social justice. And the question that we're going to ask each panelist today, there's so many questions we could ask, but what we want to know in your 6 to 8 minutes that you have is, what do you want people to know? And we just lost Phoenix. So we're going to move on, and she'll be back to Rocio. So Rocio and I met through Carol a few weeks ago and had such a beautiful conversation. And I literally felt jazzed up after I talked to her. And I would be willing to bet she has that effect on many people. She's an unapologetic optimist. I love that. And a sought after international speaker of truth. She's developed hundreds of inspiring and life-changing leadership talks that have helped thousands of attendees embrace success by becoming more intentional. She believes everyone has the capacity to live an empowered life of prosperity, service, and happiness. Rocio, what do you want people to know?
Well, I've started my life here like Plashan, and many people have experienced so many different things in helping people. I started off my life as a little girl who had a dream, and I experienced a tremendous amount of trauma at a very young age. Starting from the age of 3, I suffered physical, mental, and sexual abuse. And to know the impact of that as a young child, at the age of 5, at the age of 10, away from home at the age of 12, because I couldn't handle the abuse anymore. And knowing that we all have an opportunity. I don't think I was ever hurt, even when I ran away and I was in the care of my grandparents. People didn't know how to take care of me. They didn't know that I needed to be listened to or talked with, or even had any type of support as a matter of being abused. And everyone knew. I think it's just the conversation. What conversations are we not having in the world, in the community? People that may not be prepared. Let's be prepared to have that conversation. Let's be prepared to listen. Let's be prepared to be even more curious about what is going on with individuals. And I know for me, as I'm working with clients, and it doesn't matter, it could be somebody who earns 70 million and loses it, 10 million and loses 2 million. It doesn't matter whether they're leading themselves or leading a team. Trauma comes up all the time. How do we deal with it here now? How do we connect with them when somebody doesn't feel that they're worthy? Just like I didn't feel like I was worthy. I felt like I was on top of the world at one point, even though I had repressed so much of that trauma. And I think that we repress our trauma. I know I did. At 33, I thought I had lived an extraordinary life, and I was very far from that. I was an empty nester. I had the car, the house, the kid, the education, the business, the everything, yet I hadn't lived because that trauma was still there. And it wasn't until I actually moved to San Diego in 2011 that I did my own hokey pokey moment in getting out there and saying, hey, what do I need to heal? What's there? What is inside of me that I haven't healed yet? And how do I transform that and transcend that? And just like my clients as well, who are having that, who are experiencing that for themselves, I know what it's like to be in their shoes and go through my own transformational process. And it's taking it out. It's being willing to talk about things that we're not willing, that we're uncomfortable talking about. And it shows up in the boardroom. Trauma shows up in the boardroom. It shows up in education. It shows up everywhere. And I truly believe that there's an opportunity for all of us to get trained in what trauma is, how to deal with it when it shows up, because sometimes it shows up very subtly. Sometimes we think we have a picture of what trauma looks like, and we don't. Or maybe it just flies right by our head. And here's an opportunity for us to be educated, be informed, be more empathetic, more compassionate, and understanding that trauma shows up differently for every single person. And the way that that's dealt with is extremely different. Where I've had individuals who are hanging on to the experience of being abused, whether that was verbal or physical or sexual, whatever it is, they can't get past and deliver to their greatest capacity until they release that.
Thank you for that. I loved what you said about trauma shows up in the boardroom. I would argue that it shows up in the sandbox, the classroom, the bedroom, all of it. And I really appreciated the point you made about it not discriminating. I have been in 12-step rooms for over 21 years. And one of the things that I love about it is that we're all the same. And it doesn't matter what people look like or where they went to. And there's all kinds of sayings about that, whether you're coming from Harvard or a park bench or whatever, we're all dealing with the same thing. So that was a really great point to make. And I'm going to go back to Phoenix. Phoenix, can you hear me?
I can hear you, Elaine.
Okay, so why don't you pick up where you left off?
Yeah, definitely. I'm sorry for the technical problems, but it happens these days. Well, I'm just really honored to be here with you all today, and I'm excited to share some of my big ideas with you in reflecting on what do I want the audience to know. Well, I've been searching my whole life for the answer to one question. Why is humanity so screwed up, and how do we fix it? There's so much intergenerational trauma going on in so many communities. And I wanted to get to the root issue. What is really happening here? Let's think really big. Through my education, my personal and professional experiences, I now feel like I have a concrete answer based on a lot of scientific information that I want to share with you all today. My theory may not jive with everyone, but for those who will get it and appreciate it, I believe it could be life-changing and perhaps lead us in the direction of world peace. I'm really serious about that. Let's take a journey 10,000 years ago. We were doing really great as hunter-gatherers. However, we ate a lot of the large mammals into extinction, and in many parts of the world went into a kind of scarcity mode. Well, because we had our superior big brains, we invented agriculture, which seemed to be a solution, and then private property. And through this, women and children became commodities. There became lots of war and oppression and obviously trauma. So this intergenerational trauma of potentially 10,000 years is what our species is carrying. Now, to give you an idea of what it looked like when we were hunter-gatherer tribes and what it looks like for a lot of indigenous people still around the world, is that by nature, we're actually peaceful and loving, we're cooperative, we're socially connected, and we know our place in the world and in nature. We're not competitive savages who are cutthroat and greedy. That's actually not the case. But what's happening here? It's our biology. The evolution of our prefrontal cortex kind of creates this feedback loop for the trauma that we've experienced, where we're able to imagine things happening, and to our body, it's like it's still happening right now. So we've been caught in a lot of trauma and passing that on to our children. Anything that was too much for us to process, we pass it on to future generations to deal with. In the first 2 years of our life, we learn all of our social behavior and all the things that we need to survive as a species. And then we just keep playing that out later on in adulthood. So, we wonder why racism and other really big oppressions and prejudices exist today. And it's because those people were born at the time they were born in the place when racism was extremely prevalent. And so they just keep carrying that with them kind of unconsciously. And this is how certain environmental cues that we need for our healthy development and biology. I mean, think about it. We were raised in tribes with so many people helping to take care of the children, so many people helping to do all of the tasks. And now we're in the situation, especially here in America, where it's usually on, 1 or 2 people to do all of these things. And the only people who really have the access to be able to hire babysitters and put their kids through good schools and all of that is the privileged class. So it's really causing a lot of social problems, all of this like thousands of years of history building up to this one moment. But the great part about all of this is that because we learn so many of our social behaviors really young, we can actually turn things around for ourselves collectively with just a few generations. If our children were able to get the things that they really needed across the board, we would be able to see that more natural state of being, that joy that children have, the gratitude and the peace and the love that is all accessible to us. But we have to heal that trauma and all of the generational it takes a lot of work, but I think we're finally in the place to be able to heal those things, because when we're having to survive, when we're having to figure out where our food comes from, where we're going to be sleeping, like we don't have the capacity to heal because we're still in that trauma mode. And now so many of us are able to get out of that. We're able to seek therapy and other forms of healing. And so I think this is going to make a big, big difference over the coming generations. So the takeaway here is that there's so much healing that we can do through loving ourselves, loving each other, trusting that life, God, nature has not forgotten you. It's all in the works. Just evolution takes so long. And I think that having an evolutionary perspective and moving back towards the ways that we naturally evolved and embodying those is really the key to our future success. So thank you so much for listening. And I'm just really, really jazzed to be here today. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for mentioning intergenerational trauma, because, that's a really important topic that I hope next year we'll be able to spend a little more time on. I'm a graduate of the Hoffman Institute, which was life-changing for me. But one of the things that they say is, if your mother didn't know how to love herself, or your father didn't know how to love himself, then it would be impossible for them to teach you to love yourself. They were doing the best they can with what they were taught. There's also something that I heard there that was, everyone's at fault, but no one's to blame. And that's what you reminded me of. And, these conversations are so important in breaking those patterns. So, Rocio, I think you're back with us now.
Something that I'd like for people to take away from trauma is that trauma shows up everywhere. It shows up, again, in the boardroom, in schools. It shows up even in the grocery store. And let's be prepared to start to have these conversations, to learn how to have empathy and connection, be able to hear people out as people. Sometimes there's communication that people haven't delivered, to get to the root of what it felt like when we talked about, Elaine, that in the beginning. What does it feel like? What happened inside of that human being in those particular moments? What can we do here now as leaders, as individuals, as friends, colleagues, whoever it is, to help alleviate and free that individual? Once that individual is free, in my experience, it's been extraordinary. It's the quantum leap. It's learning from and taking tools from those experiences and those traumas, and being able to be even more successful in their life as the result of being able to express themselves. That's the main thing. And one of the greatest things that I've taken away to help transform myself has been through affirmations and mirror work. That's been walking around and saying, hey, little girl, you are amazing. I found out all the things that I hadn't heard as a child. And I started telling myself those things. And whether it was, I never heard you're good enough. I never heard I'm proud of you. And I would walk around saying that to myself. I'm so proud of you. Hey, little girl, you're extraordinary. And it wasn't until a huge moment, another traumatic moment with a brain tumor, that I had to come to grips with it and face it and say, okay, now it's time for me to start healing everything I had repressed. And I see that everywhere with my clients and helping them transcend it. They feel like they've had more success in 10 months than what they've had in 30 years once they've been released from that trauma, once they've been heard. The key is to hear, the key is to have empathy, the key is to get into the feeling of the experience of what it was and to get into people's shoes.
Thank you, Rocio. And you brought up what I think is a very important piece, and that's the expression piece. And if you were never allowed to express yourself as a child, it gets pretty complicated pretty quickly. And that's a really great segue to introduce Koelle. Koelle is a life coach. She's a horse whisperer, and she's the founder of an Equus coaching movement. She's trained hundreds of Equus coaches all over the world. She supports individuals and organizations throughout the United States, Canada, South Africa, Europe, all over the place. In fact, I don't know the half of what she does, and I've known her the longest of anyone on this panel. Her work has been featured in O Magazine, BBC Business Report, the National Journal, and the OWN Network. She's also has a very, very well-received TED Talk that she did a long time ago, but it's still very relevant. From a personal level, I want to say that Koelle is one of the first people that I ever truly believed saw me. And we've had a lot of moments over the years in different countries and different ranches and all kinds of different things. And I'm so incredibly grateful for her in my life. She's been one of the best teachers I've ever had. And Koelle, what would you like people to know?
Oh, goodness. Well, before I answer that question, I just have to say thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here with all of you and to be diving into such an important conversation. And just such a beautiful introduction. Thank you, Elaine, and thank you for this conference and the opportunity to share together today. My personal journey, like so many of us, is pretty laden and laced with a lot of trauma. And for me, growing up, I essentially had the opportunity to be able to really look to nature. And most of those human relationships were pretty confusing, really damaging, and just, outright inappropriate in many, many ways. And so I went from being a very, open, excited, curious, young child to feeling really shut down and unable to trust in people, feeling very, very confused about what this experience of life was all about. I couldn't figure out where the love had gone, and so that sort of took me towards leaning into nature and looking for connection in nature. And around the time that I was 9 years old, I was lucky to be in an environment where I had the opportunity to connect with a lot of horses. And that was a saving grace for me. It had a huge impact on my life. And, through that journey, I think I was very blessed to learn some important insights. One of which was this whole, our experience of trauma, when we go through experiences of feeling overwhelmed. It's not that there's, life is filled with experiences of trauma. When you look at the rest of the animal kingdom, there's, animals being hunted, there's, sickness, there's illness, there's loss, there's grief, along with a lot of beauty and a lot of points of amazing connection and playfulness. And so it's, the life experience covers this full gamut of different experiences that we have. And I can remember being a young girl and watching a horse that was actually being beaten by a trainer. And I was so horrified and so shocked when I was witnessing this. But the thing that stunned me even more was that after this whole event was over, I watched this animal go back out into the pasture with its fellow herd and fellow horsemates and sort of shake and jump and kind of release all of the energy. And then they were right back to being a deeply present, peaceful horse, engaging with other horses. And in that moment, I thought to myself, hold on a minute. I don't do that. I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to reconnect with people after something, after being really sexually abused or lied to or manipulated. And so it got me incredibly curious about our innate capacity for resilience and our innate ability to actually heal from our experiences, the intelligence of our bodies and our capacity to do that. But I wanted to understand why wasn't I able to do that? Or why weren't we doing that as human beings? And I came over time to understand that it really comes down to being able to feel safe in relationship. When we human beings go through experiences of trauma, we go through experiences of overwhelm or heartbreak or intense betrayal, we shape like a lot of narrative and a lot of meaning around what does that mean and why did it happen, and feeling a sense of shame or guilt, or feeling like we did something wrong to cause these things to happen. We do our very best to give meaning to it. And often when we're doing that, we can create a narrative that causes us to stay really stuck in the experience. Meanwhile, we never return to a place of safety and belonging, so that the intelligence of our bodies can heal and discharge these incredibly intense and overwhelming experiences. And so I began to look at, gosh, Phoenix spoke to it so beautifully. We've had so many generations of trauma, and we've had a lot of unprocessed trauma, and a change in our whole cultural focus towards perfectionism, towards scarcity. And we have had a tremendous amount of judgment and ideals that we've been born into. The result is that most people do not feel safe to be themselves. Most people do not feel comfortable just showing up as they are and being accepted as that, being valued as that. And I think that is probably the thing that really I learned so beautifully from the natural world and from horses specifically, was that if you want to actually experience connection and you want to be able to heal, you have to feel safe enough to be your whole self and to be in the presence of other people in safe relationships. So I would say that that as a result of that important lesson, my work has really been focused on helping people to understand, what do we need to feel safe connecting with one another? And how do we actually begin to shift from a culture of perfectionism and into a culture of belonging, and being able to really see and witness one another and celebrate each other's uniqueness. That's one of the things that's so delicious to me about the rest of the natural world, is how everything belongs. And the more diverse it is, the more it creates this incredible harmony of how everything supports one another in a relationship of reciprocity. So, I would invite people to just take a little time to get curious about what you might need to feel safe connecting with other people. And certainly right now, that's going to be heavily impacted by the trauma that all of us have lived through and the ripple effects of that. But beginning with that question really allows us to start the repair process, and allows us to start to explore, okay, how do I begin to communicate my needs? How do I begin to communicate my boundaries? And how do I start to form relationships that feel safe? When we're in an environment where we have safe relationships, our bodies and our psyches actually know how to heal from these overwhelming experiences. We're incredibly resilient. We just need a safe container to return to in order to let that healing process begin.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for the reminder. I remember when you and I were in South Africa, gosh, a while ago, and you pointing out to me, we were watching animals, and I remember you pointed out to me, just pay attention to them. How do they spend their day?
Yeah.
They eat, they play, and they sleep. They don't get up in their head because someone gave them a dirty look. They don't get, all that. And that moment has always really stuck with me. And I find a lot of medicine in nature. So thank you for teaching me so many things. And thank you for being here today.
You're so welcome.
So Plashan, I'm so glad that you're with us today. I think that you've done so many interesting things, and you too have helped me along my journey by seeing me, and I appreciate that, and I love you for it. Dr. Plashan McCune is the author of Trauma and Post-Secondary Success, a framework for systematic change. Her career has been informed by her passion for social justice and systems reform. She specializes in infusing trauma-informed sensitive practices focused on culturally responsiveness within programs for African-American youth. She's served as a K-12 administrator in Chicago, Denver, and Oakland. She's a global thought leader with criminal justice reform and mediation, and she's a sought-after facilitator and trainer. Dr. McCune, what would you like people to know?
Well, I want to share this. Hopefully, technology will work with me. So first, before I get into that, I want to say thank you. I feel like I have been blessed with a gift today, being a part of this panel and just hearing from my colleagues so far. So thank you, and thank you for the gifts that you have shared thus far. So let's see. So these are the 4 things that I want you to walk away with today. The difference and intersection between trauma-informed and trauma-sensitive. And I noticed, Elaine, that you kind of tripped over that sensitive piece. You're like, what the heck is that? Because a lot of times we don't talk about it. We actually don't know how they go together, and most people actually have never heard of it. That transformation will happen in systems that are designed to work. Currently, the systems that we work in are not designed to work for people who have been impacted by trauma. There are practices that can support healing and recovery, and Koelle has talked about some already, and Rocio. And you can be part of, all of us can be part of healing and creating healthy systems. So no mystery, no secret. This is trauma-informed, and this is trauma-sensitive. And I'm actually just going to skip straight through the next one, which actually breaks down the similarities and differences. So we talk about trauma-informed a lot, but do we really know what it means? Right? I think some of us assume that we know. So anyway, it's all the ways in which a service system is influenced, the ways in which it is modified to be responsive to the impact of traumatic stress for the purposes of decreasing re-traumatization and contributing to recovery. I think some of us think being trauma-informed is just having the information. A lot of us don't do the work to be part of decreasing re-traumatization, and in turn, meeting the needs of everyone involved in the system, everyone impacted by the system. And then we have, and I'm going to move you all over, trauma sensitive. It emphasizes safety. And I think we talked about, Koelle, you just talked about safety, empowerment, and collaborative partnerships. And I think collaborative partnerships with horses is amazing. Collaborative partnerships with animals, sometimes they're better listeners than humans, right? And definitely gracious and don't hold grudges, right? And when we see that when people show up with those trauma scars, that we see that those negative behaviors as injuries. A lot of times we get caught up in what I call trauma drama. We see someone else injured, right? And I think there's a saying that says, hurt people, right? And we've heard that a million times, but sometimes we don't stop to think that this person is trying to hurt me or hurting me because they're injured, right? When I lead trainings, a lot of times I will ask people, do you fault a pregnant woman for squeezing your hand or breaking your fingers when they're in labor, right? If a woman is in labor and she's in that excruciating pain and she's holding on to you or in some way, sometimes cursing and screaming and acting like she's in The Exorcist, you don't fault her because you know she's in pain. You know she's in labor, that something's happening. But a lot of times we fault each other and we hold grudges against each other because we have maladaptive ways of expressing our injuries and our hurts. But if we see that as injuries, I think that we will respond to each other a little bit differently. So I want you to know that there are systems and ways for us to show up in systems. And I'll talk more about this in my book, but the SIP approach or the SKIP approach, and I want you all to have visuals. I'm a teacher, I think, by nature. And so I want you all to for this to stick with you and for you to walk away understanding that we actually can change this, that people have been impacted who have been impacted by traumas in schools and in organizations. They can heal, and we can be part of that if we are part of a system that is created to heal, where we start with ourselves, right? Reflecting on what's going on in us and how we're responding to each other, how we show up in the world, that we look at the culture and the climate that we're part of creating, that we look at planning. When I was a high school principal, one of my schools in Oakland, my teachers had experienced so much trauma in West Oakland. If I shared the stories, you all would be in tears. But one of the things that was a big deal for them was for me to create an agenda for our staff meetings and to send that ahead of time. Now, most people would say that's kind of silly, or, to me, let me just say, I said, okay, why is everybody tripping out about an agenda? But it gave them something to look forward to, but also, as Koelle said, to be safe. They kind of knew what was coming and they could be prepared. Like little things like that, that impact people who have experienced trauma in major ways. And just thinking about how we plan, how we talk, our pace. When I lead trainings, I often will open it up with music, because that's a trauma-informed, trauma-sensitive practice, to kind of relax people and tell them ahead of time without saying a word that the space is safe, right? That it's comfortable. PBIS, for those people who are educators, positive behavior interventions and supports, but it's really just the systems and the responses and the feedback that people get for their behaviors and how we think about that. And then, of course, how we structure our policies and procedures. We can be part of the healing and restorative process by doing what? That we see that and understand trauma, and that people have been influenced, be influenced by your understanding of trauma and change how you show up. Emphasize safety, empowerment, and collaborative partnerships. Modify the situation so that you're responsive. Why? To decrease re-traumatization. Why? Because you understand that the negative behaviors are caused by injury. They're just not being a jerk. Although I think we have more grace when we're dealing with children than we do when we're dealing with adults, right? We don't see that adults are actually just children with a few more years on them, right? And so just really understanding that that person doesn't want to show up that way. They have been impacted by some very serious things in their lives. So see, right? And I think Rocio said this, see, understand, be influenced by what you know, right? And when you are empowered to change things, which we all are in some ways, whether it's changing the system because we're leaders, or changing how we respond to someone, we're still powerful, right? But we have to see that when we show up in certain ways, whether it's us or someone else, that we may be showing up because of how we've been hurt, right? Our injuries. And so your work, this is what I want you to know, you have some work to do. That you see things and you respond to decrease re-traumatization and contribute to recovery. That you engage in the training, engage in the research, whatever you need to do to gain some practices and some skills to help people who have been impacted by trauma. And if you have, like myself and the other panelists, I think I've experienced all the traumas that we've talked about thus far. In addition to being a Black woman in the United States, right? And that historical and racial trauma that I carry even in my DNA, that we look at those things, that we see each other differently. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Plashan. You said so many things. One of the things that stuck out to me was well, I'll say it this way. One of the things that I've learned is that, you know, we have all these different aspects of self. And for me, my childhood trauma started at 8 months old, when my parents adopted my brother before I was a year old. And then there were a number of children adopted every year after that. So I quickly lost my place in the family. And in order to survive, my intellect kicked in and my emotional self was stunted. And so a lot of times, even as an adult, you know, having big jobs and working on Wall Street or doing this or doing that, I had the emotional capacity of a 10-year-old sometimes. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I'm unique. Mm-hmm. And so it takes a lot of courage to do this work. And it's hard, but it's so worth it. And I do think that, you know, I encourage people to take that leap and do their work, because it helps you with all these other things. You know, I look back in my own life and the situations that triggered me the most, you know, those people were my best teachers. So, and speaking of teachers, Erahm, Christopher, you and I've done a lot of things together over the years, and you've been an amazing teacher to me. I think you are a brilliant, brilliant storyteller. And every time I watch one of your movies, I cry, because I'm so proud of you and the work that you do and how you connect with other people and how well you make people feel seen. Your movie Listen literally changed my life, and I've shared it with so many people. And again, every time I watch it, it gives me something else to think about, because I see myself in all the characters. And I think that anybody who watches it would probably have that experience. I'm so incredibly excited that you're with us today. And just to share a little bit about Erahm, I could do a 10-page introduction on you, but Erahm is a filmmaker, a social strategist, a speaker who creates content to bridge social divides. He's provoked connections, healing, and lasting behavioral changes in the most dangerous schools and diverse organizations across North America. He launched his career in education when he wrote and directed the award-winning Teen Truth film series and Teen Truth live experience. And that's when I met him, probably 15 years ago, I guess. And in 2017, he released his debut film, Listen, and developed a comprehensive mental health initiative that's been launched in communities and schools across the nation. His work has evolved into collaborations with the federal government, state governments, nonprofits, pro athletes, mental health organizations, and corporations across the US, Canada, and Europe. In addition to his filmmaking and program development, he's written the children's book, New Friends, a book for teens entitled Teen Truth. And he's also written for the Washington Post. He's reached over 8 million people with his content and has personally presented to over 1 million people at speaking engagements around the globe. And Erahm, you have something that I've never seen before, and that is an ability to galvanize an entire auditorium of 9th graders to be completely zoned in and connected to every word that comes out of your mouth. And it is so incredibly special. You've been an amazing teacher to me and so many others. And again, just thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today.
Well, thank you,
What
Elaine.
do you want people to know?
Well, first, I want them to know that you are fabulous, and I appreciate that that warm introduction and also this opportunity. And I want to thank Carol also as well for putting together this panel. And I want to thank all the panelists for everything that they've said. What do I want people to know? I guess the first thing is that my education, my learning has been led by my experience. And every single project that I've ever developed has been sparked by a curiosity that has pushed me to want to understand. And my segue into education was quite unorthodox. If you would have asked me this, say 30 years ago, are you going to go work in schools and speak to students or eventually to executives? Do you think that's what you want to do? I would say no. I had no idea that I would be put on this path. And I think that every experience has made me more and more curious and pushed me in that direction. And we're talking about trauma today, and it was a traumatic experience that shook the nation, that actually jolted me into education and trying to answer a question of why. Just like, Phoenix started out by saying that we're trying to fix something that's screwed up. And this event was the Columbine High School shooting. And after that event happened, everybody was trying to answer that question of why? Why could this happen in our schools? And now flash forward today, and there has been countless school shootings and acts of violence. At the time that this event happened, I was just out of college. And what I noticed is that adults were trying to scramble to answer that question. And adults were experts, psychologists, counselors, politicians, administrators, government officials, even the Secret Service got involved to try to figure it out. And what I noticed is that there was a big void that was missing, and that was that they weren't asking the youth the question. And I feel like we were missing an opportunity to learn from what the youth were thinking, feeling, seeing, and hearing. And so at the time, I engaged in an experimental project to just go out and interview youth and see if they had anything they wanted to say. And at the time, I hadn't gone to film school. And what I noticed that after interviewing about 150 random diverse students, that they all wanted to talk till the tape ran out. And I was a complete stranger, and they wanted to talk about everything. And everything they talked about was trauma. And at the time, I had no clue and wasn't informed and hadn't really gained an education about trauma. But I was really moved by what they said, and I thought that we should give them cameras to share how they think or feel. And a long story short, that evolved into a 4-part film series, and then me starting to speak. But what it really evolved into was a personal journey of my own trauma, and one that I had hidden and hadn't talked about. And in the creation of this project, it provoked me to talk about it. And that trauma was that just after I graduated from college, I lost my brother to a tragic accident. I showed up on the scene, I was there. I curled up on the ground next to him, dealing with the horrific event that had happened. And it was something that I didn't know how to deal with at the time. And it was something that I think I suppressed, and I didn't openly talk about it. And when I created this Teen Truth project at the time, it actually forced me to talk about it, because every time I got on a stage or in front of a group of people, I told the story about how my brother was the inspiration behind exploring this topic. And I didn't know it at the time, but when I was 14 years old, freshman at a high school, I received a phone call and was threatened to get beat up the next day by 10 guys in a gang because someone heard I liked his girlfriend. And instead of telling anybody, I took a 20 gauge shotgun and I took it apart and put it in my football duffel bag with a box of 25 shotgun shells and planned to go to school the next day. And lucky for me, I shared a room with my older brother, and he walked in the room as I was zipping up the bag. And when my brother asked me what was wrong, I just said nothing. And I didn't look at him, I was looking down at the bag that was at my feet. But see, my brother listened to what I didn't say with my mouth. he listened to what my body language was saying, and he walked over to the bag and unzipped it, and he saw it was inside. And the thing was, is that he ended up telling my parents, who kept me home from school, and my brother home from school, called the police and basically dealt with that issue and solved that problem. But for the rest of my life, I never told that story. I suppressed that whole incident. And then flash forward to my brother passing away. And then 8 months later, Columbine happening. And then all of a sudden, I was exploring what was happening with these youth and what was going on and what experiences they were having. And then I was sharing my personal experience that I had hidden for so many years. So what do I want you to know is that I think oftentimes that the experiences that we have can be an incredible launching point to learning. And they can be a credible place to start that healing. And what I feel as I've worked in the educational world and on several high school and junior high campuses, and then working with administrators and educators, and then even in the corporate world, is that no matter what the age is, what the demographic is, what the social and economic background is that we can all relate on one level, is that we've experienced things that provide incredible pain in our life. And these are traumatic experiences. But what's happens oftentimes is that we often make the subject matter really, I feel, very difficult for some people to access. It becomes a subject that is foreign. We use a lot of acronyms. We try to make it more complicated, I think, than it needs to be able to have the conversation in the first place. You know, one of the things that we're hearing in schools a lot now is SEL. We need social emotional learning. We need emotional intelligence. But what happens is that for some, their eyes glaze over because they go, SEL, another acronym that I need to learn. And what I learned from these youth is that the entry point to anybody talking about trauma is learning to listen. And that doesn't mean just hearing, which is the definition that you'd probably find if you looked it up in the dictionary. It's hearing, seeing, thinking, and feeling. And when I look at the experiences that I've had with my youth, what they've helped me understand is that we need to recalibrate our listening skills. Because that was the one thing they kept telling me over and over again, no matter where I was, Rome, Italy, or Long Beach, California, or Montreal, Canada. After every single screening, there would always be a student that would say, nobody really listens to me. And at face value, we think, well, then we need to learn how to hear them, or we need to give them a voice so others can hear them. But it's not about that. What they're really saying is no one's paying attention. And I think that's the first part of this whole process of healing from trauma. It's learning to pay attention differently. And, you know, it was mentioned about generational trauma. You know, how many of us are adults that don't even recognize when we're passing it on to our children, or passing it on to our coworkers, or passing it on to our spouses or partners? We have to learn to take 2 steps back and pay attention a little bit differently to imagine what this person's thinking, hearing, seeing, or feeling. And so when I look at the work that I do, I really start with this idea of simplifying what we're talking about so it can be accessible to everyone. And at the core, like if we're talking about mental health, for me, it's about learning to listen. It's learning to pay attention differently so we can identify when someone is not feeling well, and we can see those signs. And so that's why when I do active listener trainings, that's all about mental health, but it's all about recalibrating how we pay attention. I think that's the first step, and I think it applies directly to trauma too. The second step is creating an experience. Often I feel is powerful using creativity. I use films, a narrative. Create an experience that makes it accessible so people can connect, and everyone can connect on the same level and learn and start to listen. when I would do screenings with youth, say 1,000 youth in an auditorium with a film, what I believe the film does for almost 2 hours, it focuses everybody to see, hear, think, and feel what these characters are going through at the exact same time. And their reactions, whether they're laughing, whether they're crying, whether they're screaming, or whether they're cheering, not one of them has opened their mouth to have a conversation, but everybody in that room is starting to feel the same thing that everybody else is feeling. And I've had people come up to me and say, oh my gosh, I never thought my friend would cry at that moment, the same moment that I cried at. And immediately you're creating a connection, and you're connecting people to understand that, oh my gosh, that person feels and thinks and sees and hears the same way I do, which is one of, I think, the problems that we have today, is getting people on the same page. So using a vehicle to foster that connection without forcing it upon everyone is what I think is really unique. It's like putting up a song, or like Plashan talked about using a song or a painting or a poem, and then asking, how does this make you see or think or feel? And that creates the conversation, which leads to the second or the third step to the process, which is creating that safe space so that conversation can happen. And you have to create those parameters where that courageous conversation can unfold and everybody feels comfortable, like Koelle talked about, the importance of that safety, because no one will open up if they're not safe. And then what you end up doing in that process is you're actually creating an experience that will anchor whatever happens in that experience to foster this connection, this belonging, and hopefully this beginning of healing that the person can recall back to and the person can build on moving forward. And then from that point, I think you start to use resources, training, support, and continued experiences to strengthen that healing process. And a good example is like when we would launch these mental health initiatives in communities, and one particular in South Florida, we actually did free listening sessions after them. And what was incredible is after you trained people to be active listeners, then put it in the community to practice that listening, they actually had experiences that started to make them see themselves differently in the communication they were having with complete strangers. And over time, they wanted to do it more and more. So what I'd like to end off with is simplifying, making it accessible, find creative ways that foster incredible connections and belonging, then creating safe spaces to have that courageous conversation, and then ultimately springboarding from that experience to create more that allow that to continue on.
Thank you, Erahm. And the word that stuck in my mind was recalibrate. Just, recalibrating ourselves so that we are paying attention and we are listening. And I know from my own experience, I've been accused of talking too much over the, it's just one of my things. And I've learned that that's a trauma response. I'm very uncomfortable with nothing being said. I don't know what to do in that space because I know chaos. I don't know quiet, so just really paying attention to all of these things and recalibrating. So we are about out of time, but I just wanted to see if there were any questions. Looks like we have, let's see what should parents know about addressing trauma with their children? That's a great big question. It's an excellent question. And I think just in the interest of time, if everyone can say one sentence on what you think about that question, if you're comfortable with that, you can also pass. And I'll start with you, Rocio.
I'd say the biggest thing to do is listen to your child and recreate your child. Make sure that they understand that they're safe, that they're heard, that they're loved, that they're understood, and that they understand that it wasn't them that did something that was wrong. I think a lot of time children walk away with that guilt, that fear, that not feeling safe to say things. So listen to your children, be there for them.
Thank you. Phoenix?
Yeah, hi. the thing that comes to my mind is just reducing the amount of stress that they're under in any way possible. So really attending to their physical care will help their nervous system regulate and help them to better able to like process what's happened and how to move forward.
Thank you. Plashan, you're on mute. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Didn't know I was going next. I would suggest this book is great. It actually has some specific tips for parents. And it's called The Imagine Project. And actually, she's a local author here in Parker and has reached a couple million kids with the Imagine Project. But yeah, definitely start by listening. And this book can give you some really cool tips on how to approach a conversation.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Koelle?
I think what already has been expressed is so spot on. And, you know, in terms of resources, I think learning about understanding the impact of the nervous system and the somatics and understanding attachment theory can be really, really helpful for parents. But and really just as Erahm was saying, at the heart, simplifying everything is helping a child to know they're not alone, you know, that there's actually nothing wrong with them and that what they're experiencing is a really natural response to trying to cope with what happened. And just providing a safe container for them to really be heard, to be seen, to be supported. I think, you know, again, when we provide that safe container, we really help someone to recognize that they're not alone in this experience. The body can begin to do what it does naturally.
Well, you just reminded me of something that Mr. Rogers used to say, like, calm is a language that the deaf can hear and the blind can see. And you've always been a calm for me. So I think that that's another really big point. Erahm, take us out.
Well, I love what everybody said and the listening and creating the safe space. And I think being conscious of how you do create that safe space, because some of the environments that we try to have those conversations in can actually be triggers. So really paying attention first, how you're going to address that conversation and create that conversation before you even have it, I think is really key. So sometimes the preparation to discussing the trauma is just as important as actually the conversation of discussing the trauma.
Thank you. And Carol, I think that's a wrap.
Thank you so much, Elaine, and to all of you for being here. And I you know, our hope really in the Global Minded community is that can be a place where we can have a lot of safe spaces for conversations that are difficult and courageous. And one of our sessions with Dr. Ryan Ross is Get Comfortable Being Uncomfortable. And we all need to be able to confront these things that you all have very courageously confronted in your own lives. So thank you for being such role models to the students that we serve and to those who work with them, and also those who want to hire them. So very much appreciate all the time and thought that you all put in planning this, and really hope we can all be together next year at Global Minded in Denver in June, and that you all listening and attending today can meet these people live. And I think we're all really starving for live connection and looking forward to it. So thanks to all of you, and hope you all have a wonderful weekend, and just so grateful to spend the last hour with all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.